Good morning, I'm Chris Fox. Welcome to the third video in the Outline Your Novel series. Today we're going to be discussing the three-act structure and how you can apply it to your outlining. So if you've watched the first two videos, you know that it's probably not the best idea to start with an outline. We began with the premise, and then we fleshed out some plot and some character arcs, so we have a pretty good idea of who the cast of characters are in our story and sort of what they need to achieve. Now we're going to apply a little structure to that. So in the next segment of the video, I'm going to give you a breakdown on what the three-act structure is. And then in the last part of the video, we're going to go through a screencast of my Scrivener document, and I'm going to show you how I use that structure to drop in the first scene placeholders. So that's how we build the skeleton of the actual outline. So the three-act structure is one of several different types of structures that people will apply to stories. It dates back to really Aristotle, back to Greek philosophy, and has been iterated over and over all the way up to present day. Some great people like Joseph Campbell have discussed it at length, and I would recommend making a study of the structure. It will definitely help your career. It's made writing so much easier for me. And here's a basic breakdown for those unfamiliar. So the first act is the beginning. The second act is the middle, and the third act is the end. And you're going to group all of your scenes into whatever area they fall into in the plot. Each part of this structure has a few different things that are in common, usually from story to story, regardless of genre. So for example, in Act 1, you start with a meeting, and that's where we're showing your heroes' everyday life. You can give them a small problem. In fact, you should give them a small problem right away, but it's their ordinary life. The world hasn't blown up yet. Then shortly after that introduction, you want to have the inciting incident, and that's where a real interruption triggers in the hero's life and they have to deal with it. This is your opportunity to sort of show them in action. There's a wonderful book called Save the Cat. This is where you show your protagonist saving the cat. They're doing something that makes us as the reader root for them because it shows that they're competent and willing to take action. As they progress through the first scene, you want to be building towards the first doorway or gateway. So each of the acts has a transition, a gateway that's going to take it into the next act. And that's the moment at which you know that their life can't go back to what it was before. So a great example that most people are familiar with is Star Wars. The end of the first act is when Luke pulls up in the speeder and you see that his aunt and uncle are dead. His farm has been burned. There's no going home, literally no going home. It's been destroyed. His whole life is altered. He's been thrust into the second act, and now it's the middle of the movie, and he has to decide what to do going forward. So you want to have a moment like that in your story structure. So the first two that I define are, again, the inciting incident and the first doorway. In the second act, you typically have somewhere around the midpoint of the novel or shortly thereafter a major crisis. Something is going to go catastrophically wrong for the protagonist. So they're going to try something and it's going to fail and fail badly. It's going to knock them on their butt. This is the point at which things look like they are the worst for your protagonist. If you're doing a romance, things are looking terrible between the guy and girl. It looks like they're never going to get together. This is the worst point of the novel, and you need to define that. And then they're going to climb back up into your climax. And eventually they're going to reach a point of no return where they enter the second gateway, and it takes them into Act 3. Now they're locked into the conflict. So Act 3 in Star Wars would be the run on the Death Star. As far as average sizes for each of these acts, typically your first act is about 20% of the overall length of your novel. Your midsection is closer to about 50%. And your third act is generally about 30% of it. So that can vary a little bit. Some people prefer shorter first acts or even longer last acts, depending on what they're writing, but that's a rule of thumb. So how we're going to apply this, which I'll show you in the next part of the video, is just defining each of these major points of the story structure. And that allows us to kind of connect the dots. So once these are all in place, it's very easy for us to drop in every other chapter based on our character and plot arcs so that we have a fully fleshed out plot line. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into that. I'll show you exactly how I use the story structure. And once we're done, I will distribute the Scrivener document at the end of this process so you can kind of see how it all comes together. Okay, so you can see up here I have my three-act structure. And this is how you're going to find each of the things that I mentioned in the last part of the video. The inciting incident, the first doorway, the second doorway, and your crisis. Let me go ahead and move my crisis to the correct place. There we go, because the second doorway, of course, is the end of Act 2. And then Act 3, here we got our final confrontation. So I'm going to go back to my plot arcs, and this is where I'm going to find which of these scenes fit into the inciting incident, first doorway, second doorway, crisis, etc. So we're going to start with the inciting incident. So I'm looking at the Void Wraith agent / main plot here, and I've highlighted this area here. And this is the inciting incident. Nolan realizes that these stations are being hit, and he's found a piece of data that everyone else has missed, so he thinks he can solve who is hitting them. So what I would then do is take this little bit of data, copy, go over to my inciting incident, paste. Now I'll go through this and flesh this out before we're done, and that'll actually be in the 4th video. You'll see how I flesh out these scenes, but I'm just putting it in as a placeholder. So now we've got our inciting incident. Now we need to find our first doorway. So go back to our plot arcs. When is the story changed? When has Nolan accepted this quest and taken action to go solve it? When is he kind of locked in? And that is when the Admiral sends Nolan with his top agent. So he's leaving with Catherine. That's going to be our first doorway. Paste. Now we need our crisis. When are things going to look the darkest, the worst that they can possibly look in this plot for Nolan and Catherine? And that's going to be, even though they don't know it, the reader will, when Admiral Mendez is turned. This is a huge, huge blow. You're taking your staunchest ally and he's now becoming your worst enemy. So we've got our huge crisis, and we're going to need to build up to this in the plot. Bam, crisis is defined. Now we're going to go back to our plot arcs here. When is the second doorway? So when is Nolan locked into the final confrontation with the antagonist, in this case, Delta? And that's going to be when they reach the final station that Delta is about to hit first, and they dig in and get ready to fight. So they're getting to this station, they're getting the people at this station to get ready to defend themselves, and they're buckling down. We're locked in. We know that Delta's going to arrive and battle with Nolan. So that's our second gateway. And then that entire last battle, the whole rest of the book, is going to be how that plays out. So there's our final confrontation, our Act 3. And as you can see, what we've done here is created the major points along our story structure. And now every other scene that we're going to drop in, all the rest of the data in each of these arcs, is other scenes that connect these together. So if we start with our inciting incident, and that's the beginning of our plot, the rest of what happens in Act 1, we're going to create new scenes in here that are going to show each of those. And that's going to be the subject of the 4th video. So we'll go through and we'll actually create all the rest of the scenes until it's all laid out. And when we're done, it's going to look like this. So you're going to see the entire plot gets written. So we'll have like 20 scenes by the time we're done. And I'm going to go through that process again in the next video. But for this one, your homework, if you will, is just to find each of these in your own story and to define them. So that's going to be the first part of your outline. It's really simple to do, but if you do have questions on doing that, please don't hesitate to email me or post them in the comments. And if any part of this is unclear, just let me know and I'm happy to explain further. Hopefully this video has been useful. If it has, please consider subscribing to either the mailing list or the channel.